The 13th is one of those dates which has superstition attached to it. A lot of people are a little bit wary of that date, primarily because of the 1980 film Friday the 13th. But the history of Friday the 13th and the traditions that are attached to it go back much further than that. You can read the wiki article too. But that's not what this video is about. This video is about the fact that today is Friday the 13th, and it's also October. Nearly forgot what month it was there. It's also October, and Friday the 13th and Halloween have a bit of a connection for me, and I'm sure they do for a lot of people. I remember when I was 13 years old, it was, I think, perhaps the first or one of the first times that on Halloween I wasn't going out trick-or-treating, or guising as we call it in Scotland. And that was a bit of a depressing thing for me, because as a child I was acutely aware of change. I was aware of like different eras in my life, which sounds really strange. Like I remember being 10 and thinking about this sort of stuff. I used to get a little bit sad and depressed and things like that when I knew things were changing in my life even back then. And that change, where going from going out on Halloween to not going out on Halloween, doesn't sound like a big thing, but for me it was a massive thing. I wrote a story a few years ago called The End of All Hallows Eve, and that's what that story is about. It's about the last time where I went out with my friends in that group, all dressed up in our different costumes, going trick-or-treating and just loving it, but kind of knowing that it was coming to an end, and there was something really bittersweet about that. You can find it on this channel, in fact, an old version of it that I'd narrated. And so Halloween was a really special time for me, because in a lot of ways it was the one time of the year where I kind of felt really normal in terms of my love of horror and all things spooky, because everyone else for that short space of time was allowed to express those sorts of interests and enjoy the horror genre, horror movies, things like that. Even people who normally don't watch horror films, they'll maybe watch them round about Halloween time. And as a kid, I loved horror films especially, and books on allegedly real hauntings and things like that. I was just, anything supernatural or horror related it was gold dust to me. And so at Halloween I got to really, really revel in that, and my mum and dad were just fantastic. They still are with Halloween, and for all the kids in the neighbourhood and all that, we would do the house up and smoke machines and all sorts of things going on. And we were really doing that early on. My mum and dad did that early on, when a lot of people weren't doing that really in Scotland. They weren't dressing their house up and stuff like that. It's become, thankfully, more popular now to do that. I know that's a common thing in America, but in Scotland it wasn't really. But now a lot of people are embracing it. Anyway, I'm getting sidetracked with my love of Halloween. So I was 13 years old, or 13 or 14, it was round about that age. I don't want to give you an inaccuracy now. And I remember after the kids had all arrived and done their trick-or-treating and left mum and dad's house, I was allowed to pick a horror film for me and my friends to watch. And it was Friday the 13th. I had got it from the video store. It was the first film, which was made in 1980, the same year I was born. And I had never seen the first film before. Of course I knew who Jason Voorhees was. In the 1980s, slasher films were a really big thing. And you had a lot of these sort of bubblegum horror movies or popcorn horror movies. And there were franchises, and Friday the 13th was one of the big ones. Nightmare on Elm Street was the other. By the time I had already seen many of the later films. I had never watched the original. It was kind of like how myself and a lot of people saw Aliens first, and then they went back and saw Alien later on. But by the time Jason Voorhees had got to Jason Takes Manhattan, for example, he was he was more of a sort of figure of fun. It was more about the excess of the 80s. It was about teenagers running around and being dispatched by Jason in a number of overly elaborate ways. And it was kind of like A Nightmare on Elm Street was very, very similar to that. Freddy Krueger started off as this. I mean, if you think about what Freddy Krueger is, he's a paedophile who was killed and then comes back from death to kill children in their sleep while they're dreaming, in their dreams. So the idea of Freddy Krueger is, it's a really terrifying idea. But by the time you get to the end of the second Nightmare on Elm Street, maybe and certainly into the third, he became the star attraction. It became all about him, and although he was the villain, it was kind of in a very sort of pantomime way. And that kind of happened with Jason Voorhees as well, although it's maybe not quite as overt, because Jason doesn't really talk in the same way that Robert Englund, who was just amazing as Freddy Krueger, did. But when I had already seen them, so I hadn't seen Friday the 13th Part 1. And I got it out and I watched it with my friends, and they laughed their asses off at it. It had aged really badly. Also, the video copy that we had of it from the video shop was that whatever film print originally had been transferred onto VHS. It was pretty bad, which didn't help in the first place. And then the fact that, yeah, it was very much a film of its time. So this is like 13, 14 years later. So we're in the 90s by this time. Well, you can do math. And so everyone was sort of making fun of it, and I'm kind of laughing along. But the thing was, I was really enjoying it. I was enjoying the atmosphere of it. I loved all of the practical effects. I was kind of obsessed with special effects when I was a kid. And I remember actually watching a TV special where Tom Savini, who did the special effects for the first Friday the 13th film, talked about how he did came up with some of the more elaborate kills and doing the effects for it. But that film at that time, it kind of sparked something in me, sort of reignited a sort of love of that sort of thing, because I've been interested in it when I was a little bit younger, and then sort of got more into it. I'm talking about the special effects side of things, and I got a video camera around about the same time, and started making horror films with my friends and doing special effects and stuff like that. You are going to see some of these, I'm afraid, on the channel. I am going to digitize them and put them up. Might do a little documentary about the stuff that I used to do when I was a kid, because I think some of it's awful, but I think it would be good fun to watch. So one of the things that always stuck with me, and this is a little bit of a spoiler, so if you haven't seen the original Friday the 13th, I do apologise. Kevin Bacon's in the original Friday the 13th, and it's probably the most famous kill in the movie, as he's lying down in bed, and while he's lying down in bed, an arrow gets stabbed up through the bed and through his neck. It's really well done. Yes, you can tell that it's a sort of fake body and all of that, but it's just there's something real about physical effects. You know, they are actually happening, even if they don't always accurately represent what things would look like in real life. There's a real joy to them, and thinking that someone took the time to make that. And I'm not denigrating people who are doing computer effects. I mean, that's a great skill as well, but I really love when they do things in camera, and this film's sort of full of that sort of stuff. But it's also, excuse me, it's also the film that really popularised the kind of summer camp trope in horror, where people are going to this abandoned summer camp and then something terrible happens to them. The original film also has a great twist, which I won't ruin. If you've not seen it, then me telling you a twist means that you're already looking out for it, which I apologise for, but go and enjoy it. So, yeah, Friday the 13th, it had that sort of impact on me. And what I want to know is there any one film, one horror film that you can think about that really had that impact on you as a kid? It sort of affected you, especially if it was around Halloween, that sort of thing. So I always love exchanging film suggestions with people online. I actually have a horror review channel which I haven't uploaded to for some time, but I'm going to start doing that again at some point soon. And I always love like exchanging film ideas, because sometimes you find something you've never heard of and it's really great. I know you'll all have heard of Friday the 13th and probably seen it, but yeah, just that film just seems to, it captures a time for me in my life. It sort of resonates. It's kind of like when people talk about music and how music always it's like the sort of the soundtrack of my life, that you remember certain times in your life as soon as you hear a song come on the radio. You're like, oh, it takes you right back. And Friday the 13th takes me back to sitting in my mum and dad's house with my friends watching this horror film. It just does that to me right away. And the interesting thing is, I watched it recently, and maybe it's I really love 1970s and 1980s horror films now, probably more so than I actually did when I was a kid, because the stuff that I loved watching was like Hammer horror stuff from the 60s and before that. But watching Friday the 13th now, I think I appreciate it a lot more for what it is. I mean, it's not Citizen Kane, it's not Vertigo, it's not this great hallmark of cinema, but it is, I think, an important horror film. So if you're a horror fan, it's really worth watching. And if you approach it with the right attitude, which is that always remember that a film is a product of its time. So most films are going to look dated. So you just have to immerse yourself in that time, and not let that detract you from the story and from what's going on in front of you. Friday the 13th absolutely is a product of its time. It comes off the back of films like Halloween, trying to cash in the slasher genre. But it's one of the most important films within the slasher genre. It really it has a lot of imitators. But anyway, so that's Friday the 13th. I always, whenever I think of Friday the 13th, the date, I always think of that film. So do you have a film that makes you think about a certain time in your life, or Halloween, just one that like sticks in your mind? That's what I would like to know. Okay, so moving on from that, just a quick update on the channel. Again, as I said before, we are kind of on a hibernation at the moment on the channel. There are signs of life. That's what I will say. Callum was round here last night and we were talking about what our next projects are going to be. I'm not going to say what it is, but I'm very excited about it. And that's the sort of film side of stuff. For the audio stuff, I'm going to change my approach to the channel. A lot of you know that I've had some family stuff going on with my dad, and also my wife's heavily pregnant, and so like it's a wild time, you know. There are only so many hours in the day, and I'm focusing on what I really should be focusing on right now. But I'm hoping to get back to making some regular videos soon. But I'm changing my approach. My approach has been that we have different audio series on the channel, like from A Campfire's Embers, the Ghost Story Society, and then the sort of Terrifying Tales, real horror, that sort of stuff. But what I'm going to do is, instead of jumping between all of them, I'm going to do them in sets or like volumes. So I'll have like series 1 of From A Campfire's Embers, and once I finish that, then I'll move on and I'll do the Ghost Story Society, and then I'll finish that, and then I'll move on and do Near Midnight, which is the audio play series that's coming up for us, and then go back to From A Campfire's Embers. So I'm going to do it that way, because I feel like it's been too haphazard in a lot of ways, jumping between everything, and you end up spreading yourself so thin that you don't make much progress on everything else, because on top of the channel, you know, I have to do my writing. That's a huge thing for me. That's really is where my focus is, in a lot of ways. So it's trying to have a better balance. Also, once I have a baby on the way, well, I've got a baby on the way, but once the baby arrives, things are going to be much tighter in terms of time. But I'm quite convinced that we'll be able to still produce content for the channel, but it's going to be basically when it's ready. This is another thing that I don't want to do as well. I feel like I was falling into the trap of, like, it's Monday, I have to have a video on Monday. It's Friday, I have to have a video on Friday. And while that's really good for building an audience, and if we could keep that up, then I think we would be a much bigger channel than we are now. But I don't think there's any doubt that, first of all, I think the quality of what we do probably suffers. And you don't want to always feel that you have to put out a video and then you're just rushing things. So I want the videos to be of a really good quality and the podcast to be of a really good quality, and so when it's ready, it goes out. So there's no regular release schedule. Some weeks you might get 3 videos from us, and then you might get a couple of weeks where you get no videos. That's the way it's going to be for a while, unfortunately. But I think it's a much better way to work in terms of producing quality work that you guys can enjoy, instead of being, and in no way am I denigrating any sort of narrators or stuff, but there are many narration channels and people are just churning out 2-3 videos a week. We don't really want to do that. We want most of our stuff to be original content that's written and produced by ourselves. That takes time, so that means sometimes there's going to be these times when there aren't a lot of videos coming out. Anyway, that's all for now. I hope you're all doing well, and I can't wait to get back to making some videos. As usual, I've got a little bit of a cold at the moment. Once this lifts, I'm going to be kicking on, and you'll find out which series it is that I'm doing, but I'll finish that series and then I'll move on to another project, and that's how the channel is going to sort of work from here on in. And we will have some live streams and stuff like that coming up as well to keep everyone up to date. And until then, please do remember that I've got a Patreon, which is below. I don't know if I've ever actually made a video about my Patreon, but it's essentially, I don't like charge monthly or anything like that. I only charge it in a month if I upload a new story and new audio content and stuff like that, and that's a way to sort of support the channel and support the work that I do. So if you want to do that, then please feel free to go ahead and do that. And that's all for now. I will see you all soon. This video has went on far longer than I intended, which is always the case. Please do comment below. As I said, I want to know what one horror film sort of takes you back to a time in your life. And I would now like to go because I'm now just rambling. Okay, I'll see you all soon. Enjoy yourselves.